Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Town Hall. Some of you looking down that end of this lovely room have been here before, so you know the arrangements well. But to all of you, welcome, and for those for whom it's fresh, we'll talk you through what to do when it comes to speaking. So, action in the event of emergency. Certainly we don't have any alarms planned, so if one does sound, it will be for real or could be, so we'll evacuate the town hall, going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street, then to the car park behind the town hall and St Ronald Street. In case of any disturbance which requires the Cabinet to withdraw, councillors should withdraw to the Mayor's parlour using the doors behind me and await further advice. This meeting is being streamed live over the internet on the Council's YouTube channel and will also be available to listen to afterwards. Use of mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, is welcome, but please use them discreetly and do not disturb the meeting. Set them to silent. Do not use voice or camera flash. Speakers are reminded that microphones are to be used at all times. That works for recordings for those who may have difficulties with hearing. Let me introduce you to the work of the Cabinet. The Cabinet is the main executive body of the Council. It's responsible for day-to-day decision-making on all councils. Interruptions, all good, aren't they? And makes recommendations to full Council, major policy issues, and on the Council's budget. Cabinet is made up of 8 members, 8 councillors, each of whom is responsible for a particular range of services. So my name's Councillor David King, leader of the Council. I'll ask fellow councillors to introduce themselves and supporting officers and go round to my right.
Thank you, David. Good evening to members of the public and those online. I'm Councillor Mark Corey and Resources Portfolio Holder, as well as representative of Wivenhoe.
Councillor Michelle Burrows, Portfolio Holder for Leisure, Culture and Heritage and Ward Councillor for Wivenhoe.
Martin Goss, Mile End Ward, Neighbourhoods and Waste Portfolio.
Councillor Alison Jay, Highwards Ward and Portfolio Holder for Economy, Transformation and Performance.
Councillor Luxford Vaughan, Portfolio Holder for Planning, Environment and Sustainability.
Councillor Natalie Summers and St John's Ward and Portfolio Holder for Communities.
Richard Clifford, Democratic Services Manager.
Andrew Weavers, Head of Governance and Monitoring Officer.
And Donnelly, Chief Executive.
A particular welcome to other officers and to fellow members from all the political parties. It's great to see you here. Item 2, urgent items. Urgent items. I've accepted a recommendation from the scrutiny panel. Let me explain the reasons for well, that will be self-evident when we get to the item. I'm considering taking the recommendation to address a data breach from Capita. This has been well publicised. It's not for this authority alone. We're one of 11. Are we anybody here from the scrutiny panel? We can take that urgent item now if there is. If not, we'll just address it now as Cabinet, and then we'll go to have your say. So the recommendation, having taken the report which has been published, is that all contractors be required in writing to agree to comply with the data protection requirements and policies of this council. The internal audit to be asked to review the council's data protection policy and arrangements, specifically regarding ensuring that the council's requirements are met by its contractors and third-party data processors. The report's comprehensive in describing the context for this, that this is not by us, but it's by those acting for us, and describes the actions that have been taken in response. We do take this very seriously. Unlike some, we've been very frank and direct, approaching residents to let them know the issues and also the context and how constrained the data breach, if it is a data breach, that's still not entirely clear in terms of access to information, how that's occurred and what steps are being taken as described here. Mark, is there anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, David. Just that I attended the scrutiny panel to talk through this item. It's within the resources portfolio. In order to manage our data in this way, we contracted out to Capita, which is a large organisation, one of the few that handle data in this way. And we are sometimes limited in who we can go to, but we do have clear agreements with them. They should have followed our procedures and their own procedures, but there was human error related to this and completely at fault on their part, not ours. But we've done everything we can, as the leader said, to be as open and as engaging with our members of public that may have been effective as possible. And I absolutely respect the questions that some councillors have asked of the council and of the officers, and we've answered all of the questions we can. And these recommendations just help to cover off any concerns we have to ensure that contractors are absolutely complying to our data protection rules. Sometimes their own policies go further than ours, with some of these companies that are bigger and handle data beyond what we do. But we must ensure they meet the minimum standards that we ask and go beyond that if their own requirements say so. And I think the part B, the internal audit, is just another check to ensure learning going forward. So I'd accept both of these. I think working with the scrutiny panel, we came to the right kind of balance, Chair.
Thank you, Mark. Cabinet, do you accept the recommendations? Yeah, agreed. Thank you very much. Item 3, declarations of interest. Any Cabinet members have any to declare? And thank you. We also have the minutes of the last meeting to agree or otherwise. Agreed? Thank you. That was item 4. Right, item 5. Have your say. Now, have your say is when councillors or members of the public can come and speak to us directly. We'll give the fullest response that the circumstances allow. We'll follow up in writing or outside of this meeting if that's not possible tonight. It falls into 2 parts. We take those who want to have what we call general have your say, that speak to issues that may or may not be on the agenda at the beginning of the session. So that's now or later during the course of the meeting, whatever would work best for the flow of business. So have your say, general statements and questions. I've got 2 gentlemen here, so Bob Russell and then Robbie Spencer. So Bob, you know this so well, please do come up.
Thank you, Chairman. Cabinet has just agreed the minutes last meeting, have your say, and they are accurate so far as it involves what I said at that meeting. I stick by the view that this Cabinet has no moral legitimacy because its 8 members are drawn from just a group of 15. That means that 36 councillors are not represented around the table. I didn't advocate at the last meeting that a different party should take over the Cabinet. My view, ever since Cabinet came in, is that it's not the way that local government should be addressed. It was imposed on local councils by the Blair government. And the coalition government in 2010 brought in legislation to allow a committee system to be restored, and that was taken through the House by a Liberal Democrat minister. Regrettably, Colchester Council's Liberal Democrats have refused to adopt Liberal Democrat party policy. I am a founder member of the Liberal Democrats. I remain a member, but I'm not active. Everybody knows I'm not active in a party political sense. And I discuss matters with councillors in all political parties if they so wish. I need to set that out because what I said at the last meeting led to somebody, and obviously the 8 people around the table here must be prime suspects, I was reported to the Liberal Democrat Party head office with a request that I be suspended from membership of the Liberal Democrats. It's an anonymous complaint, so there's not much backbone there, whoever did the anonymous complaint. So therefore, as I say, I have to assume that any party member, and the 8 people around this table clearly must be principal there. Anyway, it was investigated and it was rejected, not surprisingly. I have read, this is what I've said, I've read the minutes of the meeting. I do not read them as supporting or advocating for an alternative political party, and I don't think the comments clearly bring the Liberal Democrat Party into disrepute. Respondent, me, was speaking as an individual exercising his right to free speech. Clearly his comments may differ from and upset the local party and Liberal Democrat group, but there has to be room for members to express a differing opinion and criticise a decision. I note he is not bound by collective responsibility of speaking as an ordinary member and expressing his personal views. I cannot conclude that they risk the reputation of the Liberal Democrat Party. I therefore dismiss the complaint. This is 22nd of June. So, Chairman, you're the leading figure, Liberal Democrats. Somebody, and it may be around the table here, wishes to suppress my free speech. It's not the way I think that our party should behave. We should practice what is preached, and I would suggest you follow the good example of the councils of Royal Borough of Kingston-on-Thames, London Borough of Richmond-on-Thames, and London Borough of Sutton, Liberal Democrat councils, all of which have politically balanced committee systems with no cabinet.
Thank you, Sir Bob. As ever, you do us the honour of being here as our High Steward, here talking for yourself.
I'm not here as High Steward.
I said, speaking for yourself, but we welcome you here. I welcome you here as leader of this council, as my colleagues do here and in full council and away from this building. There is no conspiracy I'm aware of. There's no complaint from me or from any of my colleagues to my knowledge. Of course, a complaint to the Liberal Democrat Party can be, I understand, from anyone. It could be a party member or somebody who just disliked the way that you were as frank as you were about how you saw things. I can't offer you a redress or assurance on this. I can only address the more fundamental point, which is freedom of speech and having a different view. Of course, you must continue. You don't need my permission for this, to come to us and speak to us formally, informally, whatever way you'd like, as frankly as you do, and you do. That's your right. We support you in doing that, Sir Bob. And this doesn't deserve more time. We've asked ourselves, we know not who made a complaint. Now, I did not, to my knowledge. We did not. We do not know where it's come from. I hear the result. I note the result. I'm unsurprised by the result. You'll continue to be welcomed, whether you are a critical friend or just critical. It doesn't matter. You'll be yourself like any other who comes here, and you'll have a warm welcome.
If I could just, I didn't do it either, Bob. If I had a problem with you, I'd tell you to your face.
I apologise.
It's fine. No one saw me put my hand up. I also agree with the committee system, but I believe, and I can happily refer to Andrew, that 3/4 of the council need to agree that before we can change it over. So it's not a responsibility of us 6, because we're very much in the minority. And as a minority, well, not a minority party, but not the biggest party, we would not win that vote either if that was our view. So, I'm saying it to your face. I actually think it's a much more democratic system. It's a lot slower. I don't necessarily think that this is the right time to move to it, but personally, I think it's much more democratic.
And if you, Bob, if you allow me one last sentence, but if you want to come back, please do. We have had this conversation before. We did last time when you were here, and I meant what I said. I did ask what colleagues who've been in politics locally for a long time thought was the better system. And to the extent there was a view, for some it was very clear, it was the cabinet system, for good or ill. There was a preference. There is no appetite that I see inside the chamber to go to a committee alternative. I respect, as you say, that some councils have done that. Some are in that system and didn't move to cabinet. 1 or 2 have made that decision locally or recently. This is what we've got. We have a majority in the sense that we commanded a mandate when the council's administration was formed, and we have the tacit overt support of 2/3 of the chamber. And we will work in a way that is at least consistent with the principles that you espouse, which is good cooperative working and a welcome for challenge, working together as openly as we can.
Thank you, Chairman. You have a busy agenda. I've got the dates for all the cabinet meetings the rest of this year.
Look forward to it, Bob. Mr. Robbie Spence. 3 minutes, Robbie. You've got a minute reply afterwards if necessary.
Okay, thank you for having me. So I'm bringing this to the cabinet meeting because I think you're the ones in charge of grant making by Colchester City Council to the voluntary sector. And my issue is about grant making to Outhouse, which is the LGBTQ+ lobby group. They've got a 3-year grant from Colchester City Council last year, according to the accounts that were laid before the Charity Commission for the year ended 31 March 2022. So I want to bring this to your attention for 2 reasons. One, because it's a large amount in itself, and that's a cause for concern. And secondly, because of the gender ideology that Outhouse is promoting in schools. And I'll come to that, and I have to give you a trigger warning because I'm going to be mentioning a sexual assault case on the 30th of June in an Essex school. So, for this year ended March 2022, Outhouse has assets of £911,000, and it got income last year of £660,000. Only spent £173,000. Just for comparison, by the way, I looked up a voluntary organisation's Colchester Citizen Advice, because I used to work in the advice sector. I know a bit about how much money, how cash-starved these organisations are. Colchester Citizen Advice had 300 in and 300,000 out. Outhouse even wrote in that financial statement, our funding has exceeded our objectives. So it poses the question to me, given how much money they've had and they can't spend it all, why is Colchester Council granting 3 years funding to an organisation that has so much? So that's the first thing. But it's the more important thing is what Outhouse does with its money. And under the training section on its website, it says Outhouse offers a variety of training to help develop LGBTQ+ awareness and support in your business or school or college. So essentially it's doing the same kind of thing that Stonewall does in its training. And that includes promoting, our Outhouse promotes discredited ideas like puberty blockers are reversible. They're not. It promotes the same kind of ideas that Stonewall does, which were subject of the Aqua Rheindorf report a few years ago on Essex University, that Stonewall's advising people about the law as they would like it to be rather than as it is. So getting to the point, on the 30th of June, there was this report of a serious sexual assault in an Essex school, unnamed, in a gender-neutral toilet. And a boy of 16 was then arrested for this. And if anybody remembers being at school, adolescent boys, testosterone raging, any private spaces where they can get access to girls, it's asking for trouble. And in this case, on the 30th of June, there was this horrible incident where there was a sexual assault in one of these gender-neutral toilets, which is the kind of thing that is promoted by Outhouse. So, can I ask you what I want you to do? Reconsider your grant making Outhouse in the light of how much money it has and in the light of the dangers that its ideology poses to school children.
Okay. Let me stay for a response if any of my colleagues have something to add to this, but I think it has to be in the circumstances as I hear it. Second part of your overt challenge to us and to others listening has to be taken with real caution. Sexual assault, issues of criminality that follows, and reputation, and views on policy of an organisation that's campaigning in a sensitive area. We know where that can go. It can get into difficult places and a lot of misunderstanding, and some hurt can follow. So bear with me if I say I think that should be ring-fenced. We'll look at that, see what we understand, and we'll talk as and if necessary with Outhouse about that. I feel more clear-minded about the first of those points. We hear all of it. When it comes to grants, having a 3 or a 4 year cycle is something that put into place several years ago, in my view, absolutely right. It stops everybody going through a process of bidding, waiting, and rebidding. That's administratively ineffective, and it doesn't help many of the charities that we support, who in turn cannot seek funding elsewhere. They have no surety. So the principle of multi-year is absolutely right, but your deeper point is about assets, income and spend, and we will have to have a look at that. I'll ask the Chief Exec if she wants to add to this, but we would want to have a look at that and look at our process. We want to put help to those who impact the life around us, who engage their communities and support them in volunteering or cause or other ways. But we don't want to add to the bank balances of those who have resource enough. But as I say, let's not come to a conclusion here. And Mark, I know you want to say something, perhaps if I might. No, okay, Mark then.
Thank you. I'll slightly declare an interest as someone who has been to Outhouse and worked with them as a member of the LGBTQ+ community. And I actually support them fully. I think the work they do is fantastic, and they've supported thousands and thousands of people over a number of generations now. They support people who are being bullied at school. They support people who are going through traumatic times, not understanding their sort of identity, their sexuality, etc. People undergoing harm, self-harm, or having been through abuse. So the counselling, the different groups that they have really do support people, support older people with loneliness as well. So there are many, many, many good things that they do. I understand their funding is quite volatile, so they don't know from year to year what they are going to get in. It's one reason why we gave a 3-year settlement, and we've done that with many other charity organisations to give them some greater stability and consistency. And we support them to do that work. And as a council, we support doing that kind of work, supporting those protected through the Equalities Act 2010 because of the protected characteristics, protecting minorities within our community, and celebrating diversity. We just had a mayoral year which did that as well. So I think it is about celebrating our communities and understanding the tough times that a lot of people have gone through and the support that the charity has given to those. I'm also a school teacher, so I understand the issues across Essex and across the nation when it comes to abuse and incidents that happen far too frequently in the schools, far too frequently. And one isolated incident, I'm afraid, is just one small example. There are many examples that happen, and I'm therefore pushing nationally to ensure we have good sex education and relationship training that focus on things like consent. And that's one thing that actually getting in early into schools, consent is probably the issue here in terms of how someone has gone about abuse. And it could be someone who is suffering with their identity. It could be someone who is suffering with a lot of trauma and therefore have taken it out on somebody else. I won't comment any further because I don't know about that particular situation. But I do think the work of Stonewall has also been advancing the protections of many individuals. And I can understand there are some discussions. I'm not from a community in a sense that I'm not in the trans part of the community, that at the moment their rights are being discussed, which I feel sometimes is, well, it is always beyond where we should be discussing, because it's their rights, and we rarely hear from trans people. But I won't go into that whole discussion. What I would say is that one isolated incident has to be looked at, and we have to look at why it may have happened. But actually looking at gender and the issues gender causes in society is probably the bigger issue, rather than looking at gender neutral toilets. But I'm happy to have that conversation offline. Thank you.
Mr. Spence, you can come back if you wish.
Well, thank you for Councillor King for saying, you know, the matter needs to be looked at and considered, and both in terms of how much money outhouse gets, and maybe also in terms of the repercussions of this one incident that has made it into the newspapers. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, Outhouse has a tremendous history. It started out as Colchester Gay Switchboard decades ago and has done fantastic work. But my concern, like I said about the Aqua Rheindorf report on Essex University about Stonewall, some of these organisations are promoting certain kinds of gender ideology, which is bound to lead to incidents like this, I believe, if you have gender-neutral toilets in a secondary school, even if it's just one incident that we've heard about. So thanks for listening.
Thank you. I have three councillors, Councillor Barber on Zoom. Actually, also we may have sometime Councillor Smith, who was valiantly trying to get into this meeting from somewhere near Iceland, but I don't think we see him yet. So Councillor Barber on Zoom, Councillor Scordis and Councillor Julie Young. So if we have Lewis Barber, that would be brilliant.
Hello.
Hi, Lewis.
How are you all? Thanks for letting me dial in. I had a meeting that overran, so apologies I can't be with you in person. My first question builds on a debate we had at County Hall on the ULEZ charge. And I was just hoping the council leader could rule out supporting a congestion charge in Colchester when, at least while he was leader of the council, would be my first point. Second, sorry, there's a 3 or 4 if that's okay, Councillor King. The second question is whether I'd previously raised about the use of car parking, spare land on our car park, so where we don't have car parking spaces already factored in, so we're not removing any car parking spaces at all, but where there's spare land, whether we could look into increasing the amount of storage for bicycles so that there's places in high use areas where bicycles are, to hopefully reduce the risk of theft. I think I raised this once at local plan or scrutiny, so I welcome any comments whether you could support that and whether we could look into sponsorship to help fund it, so be it charities that promote sustainable transport or private businesses locally. And then just on pylons, whether, just to confirm, we're reviewing all the material that's been put out by National Grid, and whether we are going to submit a consultation response on it. And I'd also ask if you would be supportive as a council leader of local plan reviewing our policies, so all members understand with nationally significant infrastructure projects where we stand as a local authority, because I feel we're being asked questions as members, and I haven't asked the chair of local plan. It's not me trying to get a dig in on him or anything. I haven't actually asked him yet. It's just something I'd like us to explore as a council, to make sure all members understand exactly what's involved with national significant infrastructure projects and where we stand with them. A12, pylons, those sort of matters are obviously having a big impact at the moment. And finally, just to check what your view is on councillors who park their cars on the pavement and on double yellow lines, if that was okay. Thank you, Councillor King.
Now, Councillor Barber, Lewis, that's a rich mix. I'll work back up. I'll work back up that list, and if colleagues want to add or expand, we'll do that. So, parking yellow lines. Well, the view has to be that's against what yellow lines are about. So, our policy approach would be to require ourselves and our officers, when they're out on their duties, not to do that. There may be good reasons on occasion. So I think some specific details might help us, but the principle is clear. And I've had similar complaints about driving on grassland with our vehicles, which we've tried to address. So we expect good practice from ourselves and from others. On local plan review, policy and guidance, I think, I'm sure that officers would be very willing to look at, with the help of the portfolio holder or others, circulating advice and guidance. I think it would be helpful if we could be specific. I take the point about national policy and its interaction with our policies and plans, but by its nature, that's set in legislation and the outcome of it. But we can take away that action to look and see what guidance and help and support we could give. Perhaps we could also ask offline for a bit more detail on specifics, if that's possible. In terms of pylons, our position, I look to Councillor Andrea Luxford-Vaughan, has been consistent that we have responded at every stage of the process. We will continue to do this to make sure that our voice is heard, and it's one, simply put, of opposition. I don't know, Andrea, if you want to add anything to that?
No, just that we have submitted at every stage, and they're actually, one thing they're good at is communicating back to us. We will do again, and I'm really happy to take a group of those councillors that are going to be affected into a separate meeting to discuss their concerns. But one thing that has come out of the last non-official consultation is that actually they've made quite a few concessions. I mean, you know, still everyone's going to hate it, but obviously we also support the fact that an independent body is reviewing the offshore option, and they're actually looking at the sensible offshore option rather than the one that National Grid has priced up, because it's irrational and obviously possibly done in such a way to make it too expensive, and therefore they have to get out of it. But what they did do at a meeting I was at was make a commitment that if the independent review came back and persuaded government that they actually had to change policy, that they would respect that and they would start again. So if they do that, there's a lot of ifs, but you know, I'm certainly on the same page as Councillor Barber, I believe.
Thank you, and the rest of the cabinet, to be frank, not least the points you just made, which is we expect to see practicality when it comes to route, line, and approach, because that skews all the costings, and then that makes it an impossible choice. We'll take offline. I'll leave that with you, if I may. Perhaps we might circulate what we have in terms of latest information, Andrea, and/or make available some time with officers as well. Thank you. That's very helpful. Second issue was around car parking and plots of land storage for bikes. We do, of course, have a new facility in the centre of town for safe storage, right in the heart of the city. And I think, I haven't been up there to check what its usage is, but I know when I look around that there is usually more space for parking a bike, and in this case safely, than there is at the moment demand. But we certainly should be open-minded to that, and we can weave that into our active travel approach, and I'd expect us to be doing that. We should be, in every respect, trying to make the choices for the residents of the city easier to take if they want to cycle and or walk or take a bus. So thank you. Principles absolutely accepted. And then on ULEZ, well, there are no such plans, so let's just nail that, because that's the kind of thing that floats around. But we have to acknowledge, and we were having a conversation, some of us, just yesterday, and it has been publicly stated, and I'd actually like us to perhaps circulate this as well, which is that air pollution drives death and ill health. And what I heard yesterday was 1 in 20 deaths had an association. You have to be very careful about this. Was it partial, primary driver of mortality? But nonetheless, there are clear links, and now accepted nationally. So our policy as a council has to be to look at all those ways which legitimately make it easier for people to lead, to take choices about the way they travel, but also to have cleaner air by whatever means they've come into to the city. But I repeat, there are no plans. I can't see that happening. I do see us continuing to try to strike a better balance between the different forms of transport into the city centre. I'll put that back to you then, Lewis. Is there anything you'd like to come back on?
No, not particularly. Thanks, Councillor King. Thank you for the indulgence with the responses. Much appreciated. All I would say is I do feel we're doing excellent work on our air quality schemes that we've got at the moment. So I really stress that we can continue to follow that approach with incentives and options rather than congestion charges, which hurt the lowest incomes as well. So I just finish on that note. I see Councillor Goss nodding on the screen, so I hope that was in agreement with me. But thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, Lewis. I think Councillor Goss often nods when he hears some facts. He's going to come in now.
Yeah, I think I've been very, very crystal clear when I chaired local plan up till recently. I am absolutely against any congestion charge. We're not locking people in the homes, and I've made that very clear to stop stuff going around social media wrongly about 15-minute cities, because there's a lot of conflation and confusion about that, and social media and wrong information does not help, because people actually believe this stuff. That's the really worrying thing. And the very worrying thing is somebody I know very well asked me about it, and I said, I've been on social media and I've said this is not happening, and unfortunately this stuff is still going around that we're going to charge people, we're not going to let them out of zones. I mean, it's just nonsense, right? It's not happening. And how many times do we have to say it in really plain, crystal clear English that hopefully everyone can understand?
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, this debate's been had in full council, as you mentioned, in county council, but it's been around London, and the debate and the controversy we understand about ULEZ, that's for there, that's not for us. Thank you. Councillor Lee Scordis. Lee, please.
Good evening, Cabinet. My questions are for Councillor Goss, and I'll start with his favourite topic, which is garden waste. Following on from my colleague Councillor Bickersteth's comments about the fee that people will have to pay who do not have a wheelie bin currently, still got some quite strong concerns about this. And a lot of this stems from when we brought in wheelie bins. And we as a council never followed through on the original plan, and previous portfolio holders never followed through on the original plan, which would have had wheelie bins much more widespread. And it also led to, say, perhaps residents of Prettygate being forced to pay more, and Highwoods as well, because councillors at the time said no to wheelie bins, and it feels like they are being subjected to this when they weren't even consulted by their councillors at the time. So this does feel quite unfair. And in my own ward, for example, the estate of Barnhall, half of them have wheelie bins, but the other half do not, because that was on a delivery route that would have covered parts of Newtown that we didn't feel was appropriate for wheelie bins at the time. So I do worry about envy kind of coming in here, where people will be going, well, I've got this and I've only had to pay an admin cost, but he's had to pay £30 or so forth. So there is a concern about that, and especially in a cost of living crisis. So I think we do need to re-look at that, and I do worry it will put people off taking on the scheme in the first year. Second one is about how we roll it out in areas where wheelie bins aren't appropriate. So, for example, Rowhedge, parts of Rowhedge absolutely fine, people have large drives, but there are certain streets where people on both sides of the road park partly on the pavement, but essentially it's an unwritten rule by residents, so more cars will fit down there. But it does mean if a wheelie bin is out there on a Tuesday or Wednesday, anyone with a pushchair or wheelchair will not be able to get past. In fact, it's an issue sometimes already. So I'm wondering what we do with areas like that, and for example, Dutch Quarter, East Street, so forth. And last one is around neighbourhood services. And I think it's become clear in my ward and my division that the service is struggling to keep up. And I am wondering if we are putting our resources in the right areas, if we are looking at that data and going, right, we need more neighbourhood teams in this area rather than here, because there's clearly a delay in some areas. It may be illness, it may be because it's holidays again, I don't know, but there's clearly some discontent with residents because things aren't being dealt with as quickly, and sometimes clearly marked as being done and not being done. So I don't know if that's just an understaffing issue or we need to look at resources.
Okay, Okay, I'll answer all these. Right, so let's be really clear from a political point of view. The Labour Party on Colchester City Council was privy and involved with the decision on garden waste charging and was in the budget in February 2023 that was voted through. So all political parties in charge of the council at that time have voted that budget through, and it's baked in and it's happening from January 2024. So I just want to be really clear on a political point there. In terms of the charging, it is not absolutely baked in stone or written in stone. And given that you're the shadow portfolio holder, you obviously will be coming to the same briefings that I attend, so that you obviously get the same briefings that I get. But obviously some of the things you've raised tonight, you've not raised with me in private. You've saved it for a public meeting, which is absolutely fine. But I would expect people, if they've got an issue at the time on point 3 you raised, to raise it at the time rather than raising it in public. But that's absolutely fine. So in terms of the actual charges, the Chair of Scrutiny has been asked to obviously take this as a separate item, so that all of the issues and concerns that people have raised around charging can go to that meeting, and then every political party will have their say on it, because Scrutiny has every political party. So the concerns about whether you've had a wheelie bin for 6 years, since 2017, and that was already funded. This is for garden waste I'm talking about. And if you continue to use the service, you will still need that bin. For people that don't have wheelie bins, clearly they don't have one, they'll have to purchase one. Now, yes, there's some debate about, do you charge people retrospectively 6 years later for a smelly old wheelie bin that they've already used, is a bit battered but still has life in it? Is that fair for the 12,751 people? Some say yes, some say no. Or is it fair that everybody pays for a wheelie bin, whether it's new or 6 years old and a bit smelly because it's been used for the garden waste? So those are the sorts of things Scrutiny will have to debate, as also the charging mechanism. And that's exactly what Scrutiny is there for. So we have to have a baseline to start from, and that's what we have. It doesn't mean it's the final baseline. It means it's there for scrutiny and discussion. And as with every Scrutiny decision, we've had one come back tonight, it comes back here for a decision. So Scrutiny might say, right, you should charge everybody for wheelie bins, whether they're old, smelly and 6 years old, or whether they're brand new. That's actually at the discretion of Scrutiny to come back here, and then this cabinet makes the decisions based on that. It might find the pricing structure needs to be amended. It might find that the annual charge is absolutely competitive with other councils. It might find it's not. That's what Scrutiny is there to do. That is what all those councillors on that committee should do. So that is what has been requested of that committee, and they will take the existing paper and proposal, and they have the right to change it in respect of their views, and they can come back here and then we can change it. We could accept that recommendation, and that's exactly what I want that committee to do, and I want them to do some hard work on it and challenge it. You know, do you allow direct debit payment? Do you, do you get rid of the admin charge? But the one thing I would say, all those councillors of various political groups, apart from the Conservatives, voted for the budget that included garden waste charges from January 2024. If I recall, Councillor Scuders, I think you voted for that as well, if I'm right, if you were there. So you've signed up to this. The issue is, the more you play around with that, the more it undermines the business case, because ultimately the wheelie bins have to be paid for. They're not free. We do obviously get some discount for buying them through a procurement process and in bulk, but the price of them has gone up considerably because of oil and because of the instability in the economy and inflation. So that is how we will treat point 1 of your query. And obviously you could come along and you can obviously have your say on that there, and that's absolutely fine. Point 2 on streets, well, this affects all parts of Colchester, because every ward has streets that have minimal street width, particularly some new developments, because of the standards that came in from the Labour government under Prescott, where it was 1 parking space per 5-bedroom house. And then of course there's nowhere to park and everyone's bumped up on the curb. You take where I used to live in Dickinson Road as a good example. We managed to get wheelie bins in there. although there was a lot of worry and it did work. So what we are doing to be flexible is we are allowing smaller wheelie bins. So the standard is 240 litres. We will go as small as 140. And we have tested them in places like Roman Road, which is one of the areas of concern, and they do work a lot better. So those options are available. Residents can have more than one wheelie bin as well. And they can also share with neighbours. And again, most other councils don't allow that. So we are trying to be really flexible, again, to deal with the cost issue, so that neighbours, providing they don't have a dispute going on, they can share a wheelie bin, etc. So that's absolutely what we'll do. On point 3 on neighbourhoods, I actually had a meeting in this very room with all of the wardens and also WISE, who obviously are our enforcement colleagues. And we had a really good debate for about an hour. And it was quite robust. They challenged me as portfolio holder. I challenged them back, because that's exactly what good relationships and discussion should be. Every team in the council is under pressure. Every council is under pressure. If there are specific things in your ward that are not being done, you can highlight them to me or to your neighbourhood manager. If you haven't done that, I'm sure you are generally, to be fair, quite proactive. But if there are specific issues, I always chase things up. I'm still chasing a missing street name plate that isn't replaced, and I've been told it's been ordered, it's in stock, and now I've been told, no, it's not been ordered. It has been ordered, but it's not in stock. So I've said, well, can we have clarity? The guys are busy, and sometimes humans make errors. So if there are issues, then absolutely let me know. But everything is prioritised. So offensive graffiti would be the first priority. That would be gone immediately. Fly tipping is a high priority, although it's down 20% year on year roughly at the moment. So the system allocates the work, and if somebody puts something in at the wrong priority when it's logged, that can affect how quickly it is actually dealt with. But if there are specific issues, feel free to raise them with me and I will look into them, or go to your neighbourhood manager, and I'm sure they'll be very pleased to assist.
Do you want to come back?
Yeah, just quickly. So I wasn't at the budget, so I didn't get to vote on the budget, unfortunately. As accidentally booked a holiday during the same time. So around the smaller wheelie bins, would people in Castle and Roman Road be paying the same for what is less?
So again, as I said on pricing strategy, it's not set in stone, or maybe I should say it's not set in a wheelie bin or set in plastic. It's there for the scrutiny panel to have a look at. The issue is the price that we pay. We're not looking to make a profit. Councils are not allowed to make a profit. We are a service provider. We are run by taxpayers' money. We're all taxpayers. I think sometimes the public forgets that. But if we buy only a small amount of wheelie bins, then obviously the unit price may be more expensive, because if we buy 20,000, I'm just plucking numbers, if we buy 20,240 litre bins, we'll get a good unit price on it. If we buy 500, 140 litre wheelie bins, again, I'm plucking numbers, the unit price might be more expensive. So that's just something you have to bear in mind. We are not looking to profit on the wheelie bins, okay? That's the main thing to say. So if it costs us 30 quid, it costs the resident 30 quid, but we also can't lose money on it as well, just to bear that in mind.
Thank you very much. I think I'd just say, Lee, that the important thing is that there's no councillor who doesn't want to get the best deal they can for their members. We suffer the same kinds of concerns. We have the same kind of representations, or at least similar. The Cabinet agreement to garden waste, reflecting, as Martin said, that budget decision, which we must carry through, otherwise we have consequences I know you would accept for other services. Got to carry it through, but we're absolutely going to do it in the way we said we would. Last year, when we said it started to emerge when we passed the budget, and when we passed, Cabinet passed the garden waste agreement, was that we would take rich options and welcome genuinely responses. We'll be the better for doing it together. We won't please everybody, it's impossible, but we will do our best to strike a fair balance. So thank you for coming and speaking up for that. We share the similar concerns, so do our residents. Thank you. Julie, please. Welcome, Julie.
Good evening, Leader and fellow councillors. We were at the LJ conference last week and we spent a lot of time talking about housing issues, and we had the benefit of an address by Michael Gove during the course of the week. 12th of July, there was an article in The Guardian stating that Michael Gove's department is handing back 1.9 billion to the Treasury, originally meant to tackle England's housing crisis, after struggling to find projects to spend it on. In the same article, it reveals that a commitment to build 300,000 homes per year has been dropped, and making it voluntary. We know that we have a growing housing crisis here in Colchester, and we heard during last week that other authorities are probably in a much worse position than we are. So I'm really surprised that money is going back to the Treasury that was designed to increase the supply of housing. So my question to the Cabinet Member for Planning is to ask for some reassurance that we here in Colchester will be keeping pace with our housing delivery targets in the months and years ahead, because we do know that we are going to be facing a growing temporary housing bill that we will need to meet.
Thank you. I'm way out of my depth commenting on national politics because half the time that's the first I've heard of that particular thing. I will say I think the removal of the 300,000 cap is actually quite a sensible one, because what's happening, as it's happening here, is we're building houses that there isn't infrastructure, and that means everybody suffers. I also have a slightly different perspective to you on the housing crisis, because I think we have an affordability crisis, and I think the problem is the banks and greedy developers. If you've got a big salary and a house that you can put up, there's no problem whatsoever moving on. What we have a problem with is getting anybody under the age of 35 into their own home. And certainly people from low-income families. And, if you want my commitment to building affordable houses, council houses, arms houses, 100%, that's, the part of my portfolio I really actually enjoy. So yes, totally a commitment to our quotas, not to exceed them though, which we've done year after year. I don't think that's helping other tenants. But more importantly, addressing the issue that you mentioned, is that my commitment to building our own, increasing our own stock, looking at other options that will mean the right to buy is removed, so those people have got long-term, or that sector of people have a long-term commitment from us, and also to make sure that we hit our affordable homes policy commitment, which is obviously now gone up to 30%, but I very much doubt we've met the 20% in previous years. And again, that's not through, us not wanting to build those homes. It's because, building houses is controlled by different people. I could go on about national politics and some of the stuff. I mean, as far as I'm aware, and I might be talking complete rubbish here, but the Tories are looking at completely changing tenancy agreements to give more assurances to tenants, which I think is a brilliant move. The other thing they're doing is completely clobbering people with second homes on tapering tax, which, I think is the right move. You don't need two houses, you need one. I think there are other ways we can address that housing crisis, because at the moment, there's a section of the population that have houses and a select section that doesn't, and that gap is huge. And I think there are different ways to address that than building other homes, because most of the homes we're building, even the stuff that's affordable, 80%, most normal people cannot afford to buy them. And that's where the problem lies.
Thank you. Can I just offer a couple of additional points? I think the first thing is the commitment's unchanged to the one that we shared together last year. As tonight's agenda shows, 2 papers on house acquisition, we are looking for new ways to acquire in ways that meet the cost and pay their way. We're going to be imaginative about what we're going to do. We're going to welcome ideas from from you, Julie, and Labour counterparts, and any across the chamber who can see where we can do better than we have. The issue for me is not about the national big picture. I accept that that politically is appropriate. The government do set both the financial incentives, they do enable through Homes England, and indeed they are enabling us and other local authorities, to be fair, to do what we can to buy to make it affordable, to make sure the bottom line is realisable in a way that allows us to proceed. So I'm not critical in every respect of how national policy is framed or how funding and support comes to us, but I accept it's a legitimate area for a conversation. And the key is people's ability to afford them, and for me and for us in this room, I suspect, how limited is the supply of what we used to call council housing. Council housing is social housing, not just affordable housing, because the costs of those do vary, and therefore their ability to be bought on as a rental charge does change also. So we've got to do more of what provides housing ourselves, and we started, Chief Exec's being part of that process, we've got to look at radical ways of increasing supply. None of this is quick and easy, but it's absolutely a shared agenda, I'd hope, across the chamber, and we intend to address it. But to the beginning of your point, yes, targets are as they are. If we can go better in our own provision to meet need, we will. I just add one extra thing. This is a bit political. I have complained to the ministers concerned, which is that we've got several hundred people in B&B and temporary accommodation, and policy at the moment out of the Home Office is going to double that, or at risk doubling it, because we have a couple hundred people, as is well known, Afghan refugees who served our nation by working with our armed forces. They and their families are here, and they're facing eviction on the 4th of August. We have many more in the same position facing eviction early next year. Now we are, without going into the details here, doing all we can to mitigate that. We've pressed for contingency plans, additional Home Office support to defer the moment of transition. There has to be one from hotels to housing, but whether that path is smoothed by ministerial help, we are hopeful still, or not, it's going to be difficult. It's going to add to the pressure for those local authorities who have those communities present. And Colchester has many strands of refugees through government schemes, for which every credit, but for which there's been very little support and consultation about step by step how their futures will be changed by Whitehall, with the responsibility of housing left here. So sorry, that's a long addition, but that's where we have to look at scale and challenge. It's not just what we got now, as you know, Julie, and it's across the borders, Tendring and Chelmsford and Braintree as well. As a nation, we are so far behind the curve of existing, let alone coming towards this need. Thank you.
I won't take too much extra time, but I do think, we need to shine a huge spotlight on this and bring in some additional resources in terms of focusing on this issue going forward. I understand that Councillor Paul Smith isn't able to be here tonight, but it is becoming an urgent matter, as we know, as Mark Stay Hotel ceases to be used for refugee housing. And I think just a couple of things. I mean, we also last week talked about the One Public Estate quite a bit. That came up quite a bit. And I think, anything we can do of an imaginative way, and I think MOD land, there's quite a lot of MOD land here that we could be utilising. Mrs. Donnelly and I looked at modular housing, and I think that might provide a solution or some solution going forward. But if there's 1.9 million that other authorities were not able to utilise, I think, we ought to be committing resources to going back to government and saying that we could use that money here in Colchester, given the scale of the issue we have with the providing housing for refugees here in Colchester.
Thank you, Julie, and stay for a second. Let's just round this off so we don't leave this half hanging. So we have had a close engagement with the Ministry of Defence. I have spoken to senior counterparts alongside the leader of Essex County Council. I have, and including the garrison commander, who actually has no control over defence infrastructure organisation. It reminds me of a past world I had also no control over the defence infrastructure organisation, although I was responsible for chunks of the estate. So I kind of know this inside out. You know, you can't get things done easily. We've got an extension of time, so we've got some help and support from the Ministry of Defence. And I look to Natalie here if she wants to add anything more. But you know, we've got some help and support from the Ministry of Defence in terms of housing away from the county. All of that's big turbulence from people who've barely overcome the trauma of losing everything. You know, home, clan, living. Now they've gained some solace and they're going to be pushed around the country. We can't perhaps do much about that, but we have done what we can. When that hotel closes, if it does, we will have plans in place to support those hundreds of people, and that's started to work its way through. We are working with the MOD, we are working with Essex colleagues. So in the short term, in a way that I hope, I look to Councillor Dundas, I'm sure we would all have a similar view about, very happy to talk about this offline. I want to go to Chief Exec.
Thank you, Leader. And Councillor Young, this is a very timely discussion for us, in the sense that we spent as a senior leadership board this morning a couple of hours looking at the most excellent summary prepared by Mandy Jones on the extent of the challenge in relation to housing. I know that Mandy is due to speak to Councillor Smith on his return from holiday, and that will trigger the beginning of a process which will bring some insight, which is nothing short of shocking and challenging around our housing challenge, to the leadership team in an informal setting, and will be the beginning of a wider engagement with our system partners, as the solution appears to be a system solution, given, as you know better than anyone, the huge implications of poor housing on health outcomes and social inequality. So I won't take time up explaining that this evening, but it will be the subject of a member briefing, several member briefings, one of which will take place the week after next, when Philip Sullivan and his colleagues from CBH will talk about one of the issues, but please be assured that this will be a subject for much wider debate in the coming months and action, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. And that has got us through. General, have your say. Right, which gets us to item 7.1, the LGA Peer Challenge Action Plan Progress. We've got Councillor Paul Dundas and Councillor William Sunnox. Would you like to come forward rather than us say our piece? Would you like to speak first, and then we'll take account of that when we respond? Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening to everybody. Yeah, the peer review. It's always interesting to see our homework marked, isn't it? And actually, I have to start with a compliment, actually, because I think quite a lot of what was in the peer review has been picked up on, particularly around some of the external reviews. I suspect others may talk about the capital review. All I can say is we do need to get on with that, because we are spending time and money accumulating debts on projects which might be axed, scaled down, sold on to other bodies, plus creating all sorts of uncertainties for our staff, suppliers and residents. So, you know, there might be some hard decisions, but putting them off doesn't help. So please get on with that. But I want to pick up on two specific points, really. The peer review talks about local government reorganisation. And it actually says, and I quote, "For example, the devolution local government reform agenda is very live in Essex and requires immediate attention. CBC needs to quickly agree its position to ensure it can advocate for a deal that works for Colchester." That's what it says. But the report presented this evening is rather vague in that, because it actually says CCC continues to discuss and engage. But the reality is things have moved on since it was written. It is increasingly clear what direction Essex is heading in. namely to a level 3 deal, most likely with a combined Greater Essex Authority, and possibly even an elected mayor, but that'll probably be government's decision. So my simple question is, now we have a new administration here, what is your view on this? Has CCC agreed its position as stated in the peer challenge, and what is it? What are you advocating as a deal which works for Colchester? Does the CCC administration back a Greater Essex Combined Authority? What is the administration's view on an elected mayor? It is important there's a clear strategy on this, and you as an executive agree on it. And it's not me saying it, it's what the peer review is saying. Secondly, of course, we have in big bold type in the report the recommendation to seriously, and there's a very strong emphasis on the word seriously, consider changing the electoral system. As I've said before, our peers couldn't really be clearer on this. They think the current system is holding us back. I've used a stronger word in the past, I won't repeat it. Now, I'm of course aware that a working group was set up, and I have seen their conclusions. I don't actually agree with their conclusions, but I have to accept and respect them. They agreed them. I don't think a change to the system combined with boundary changes would confuse the electorate in the least, and I actually think it's a bit condescending for them to suggest that it would. In actual fact, I think it's the current setup which confuses people as to why on earth they have to go to the polls to elect a councillor to do the same thing every single year, or nearly every single year. But if we don't change the system now, the boundary review will have to design the system once again around 3-member wards. And we'll probably be stuck with electing in thirds for probably the next 10 years. Please listen to what our peers are telling us. They couldn't be clearer. It's bad for Colchester. That's what it says. So on this subject, I would ask you to perhaps put Colchester first and maybe reconsider it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the last point first. As you acknowledge, what we capture is the cross-party working group's understanding. I didn't see it as patronising. It's a summary. It reflects what they've said. I will be frank, as I have with you privately, my personal leaning is towards 4 yearly, but from the soundings I've taken, which is not for me to direct members, it needs a 2/3 majority to change where we are to a 4 yearly election. And there are strong arguments for the current thirds. As somebody who likes effective administration, I have to accept, despite best efforts, there is hesitation that comes with the transition, despite best efforts. But we've done what we can, and we'll do what we can again to ensure that's minimised. But here, I receive the views of members. Here in this document, we capture it. That's where we stand on that. In terms of the devolution discussion, and again, if I may say so, you and I have had a few words about this as well. So let's just be clear. Where we're at is not the end of the discussion. We do not yet have clarity on what the bargain is. I have been productive and in line, I think, with the general soundings I've taken of fellow members, including yourself. I mean, do tell us if you've changed your view, which is that we should be constructive, support that greater Essex discussion between chief execs, leaders, about what at the top level, the devolution discussion, what is best for Colchester and best for the county of Essex, greater Essex as the leader of the county council would describe it, what's best for residents that might come out of the menu from government. And we're placed right down the middle. We support those discussions. I'm sure you've had that feedback. And I intend, and my personal position is that we should continue to do that. It's a constructive thing to do. But here we go, one more time. We don't know yet what the deal is. When we know what the deal is, and we know, really crucial thing, I think, for many here in Colchester, many members will be, what authority do you have? It's two things. There's a real prize, there's money, there's some long list of interesting and perhaps substantial powers that would come with, certainly with a level 3 mayoral system, and a fair measure that would come with a level 2. But exactly where this will settle, is not yet clear. Each of the deals, county or otherwise, have varied. We're going down the middle and thinking it's 30 million, it's transport, it's skills, and it's a range of other things. We would like health, as we've said here, more influence and more integration to be part of this. And it all drives a related and actually in some respects more meaningful discussion, which is about shared services, how we can be more efficient, effective and work across the boundaries. So we have to go a bit further. On my list of things to do is to have a conversation, to engineer a conversation between the leaders of the parties here to just take stock of where you are. I was asked just this week in county, what was my position? And my response was along the lines discussed, open-minded to where this might go, supportive of the devolution conversation, recognising that many are pushing for a mayoral system, but a real concern about how that could affect Colchester. We need to know how much gravy is on the train and who's driving it before I think decisions can be made. And we have to make this a cross-party discussion. My counterparts in some local authorities, their leaders have, shall we say, somewhat different majority administrations in their chamber. It's a little different. My view is respectful of Paul, of you and Councillor Young and the parties you represent, and not to exclude our Green colleagues. We know we need to just keep touching base, but at the moment we know only what's already been shared. And as I say, I think a decision lies ahead. It clearly does.
Thank you, Councillor King. Yes, I mean, we have had some good discussions and I do appreciate them, and I do appreciate this is a difficult subject. I guess to a certain extent it's the luxury of opposition versus the responsibility of administration, isn't it? That ultimately, when this council gives the final view, it will come down to the 8 of you as the cabinet to decide what you want, because you will be putting the council's view, hopefully taking account of wider member views as well. But ultimately, you all have to come to a decision. And I think, you know, it is important that you all think about what, as the review says, what do you want for Colchester? What do you want out of this? What works for Colchester? And I'm not sure any of us have perhaps really honed in on an answer to that quite enough. And I would include myself in that, because it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. But I think it's something we really need to concentrate on trying to do, because I think we're kind of waiting to respond to what happens rather than being proactively saying, as the review says, CPC needs to agree its position to ensure it can advocate for a deal which works for Colchester. So we need to think about what we're actually advocating, because I'm not sure we're really clear yet.
We have been, just continue for a moment. We've not been sitting in a very large room in Chelsea with lots of people saying, oh, we'll just let Basildon talk, or the unitaries who actually, just remind ourselves, have the authority, right? So for those who are sad enough to want to know the detail, this can be done under the legislation by Essex with their unitary partners, without any consultation with districts. The approach taken by Councillor Bentley, in my view, has been absolutely right. He recognises a better way ahead, even though he does not have to consult us to include us in the conversations. I promise you, we have been articulate openly and behind the scenes, and it comes back to the same thing. The maximum degree of authority and power that we can wrest from government that would come down into Essex and then flow through, I'd hope, to districts, or if not, would come to the county in ways we could have influence. That's the approach. We know, Chief Executive is my side here, we know, because we represent everybody, that that's the right thing. So the maximum amount of capacity to govern as locally as possible. We believe in the principle. We've secured changes, we've encouraged through the Greater Essex discussions, over which we are an influential voice in my view, but we do not have the say, we do not have the authority pressed for the right kind of compact which would maximise the benefit to the people of Essex. We have to wait until that process is further forward. But I think we've done all that anybody would expect us to do in the circumstances. Certainly not being silent. Pam, anything else?
Well, actually, I think it's clear in the very brief narrative that we've stayed very, very engaged. And I would agree with Councillor King. We are recognised as really important advocates for devolution in respect of Colchester. I represent Colchester on the Chief Executives Group alongside Southend and Thurrock and Braintree. And we do have a very influential voice, particularly in relation to the area that doesn't, strictly speaking, fall within the area of devolution, which is health. And we've gone further than perhaps has been necessary in recognising that North East Essex, in particular, is a very mature health system and is ready and able to take powers and responsibilities directly from government with regard to health. So in summary, I'd say we stay very actively involved, seeking to influence wherever we can the skills, transport and health agenda for Colchester.
Thank you. I look forward to continuing to engage constructively. Thank you very much.
Thank you. William, Councillor Sundix, please. Follow your leader.
And backing him up all the way. Good evening, and thank you for listening. I want to be a little bit boring and party pooper and talk about the capital programme review, which was really strongly emphasised in the peer review. And it just, I just read out some of the things. We've got to get a firmer grip on the capital programme. The Council's capital programme requires immediate attention. We've got insufficient strategic finance capacity. And most strongly of all, an urgent review of the entire capital programme and given the external environment, and given the external environment, by which I think they mean interest rate rises. I mean, this is sort of a major thing, and we were hoping that we'd hear something about it shortly after the election, but it now seems that the first we're going to hear about it is 28th September. I'm very pleased there's a briefing then. But looking at the report on the peer review, I have to say, Sir Humphrey speak, I can't tell what we're doing. I really don't know whether this is a review that is just looking at ways that we can spend money, project manage better to spend the money more quickly, which is one of the problems, particularly on the new town, on the town deal. I can't tell whether we are looking properly at the appraisals and particularly at the income streams that we'll have to generate if we're to pay those interest charges. We're still sitting there with expecting to double our debt, and that new debt will come in at very much higher interest rates. And how are we going to generate money from the capital spending we're doing to cover those interest charges? And lastly, what on earth is going on at the Northern Gateway and Mill Road and the debt we've taken on there? Where's the income coming from there? So it's a bit boring, it's a bit business-like. It's slightly pooping the party when we're all talking about the need and how we'd like to build more housing. But I do think it's rather important, particularly given the financial situation of the council.
Thank you, absolutely accept that. It deserves a long answer, but all of those facts and figures would take longer than we have tonight. If you haven't had a walkthrough of where we're at, then I'd like to arrange that. So let's go back. There has been substantial work of the kind that is absolutely, and you and I have had this conversation, central to discipline, right? Understanding what it is you've got on contract, where it is and how close it is to completion. We have not gone for significant additional commitments. We've gone for ensuring we understand what it is that's in train and understand the risks. That work's been done, and the answers back were encouraging. The rest of the work, which is what else can you do, the affordability and the timetable, and areas where there is a question mark you touched on at the close of your remarks, that has not been completed, but will be.
Okay, well, I just hope that we get I very much look forward to a briefing, and I very much look forward to full disclosure in September, numbers, strategies, clarity.
I'm happy that we give, I'll go to the Chief Executive, there's a huge amount here. There has been an impressive commitment by the organisation to respond to what was known before. The peer review confirmed what had to be done. There's been the right kind of response in terms of skills, controls, gateway process, and understanding where we're at is that next step. We'll share that. I think that, I'm sure that will be helpful to you. Let me go to the Chief Exec.
So thank you, Councillor Sunnock. So I think it's fair to say that when you meet with the Section 151 officer next week in Epping, you will touch upon this as part of the wider assurance you need on the financial situation. But I'd like to very briefly address all of your points. So the requirement made very clear in the peer review to review our capital programme received immediate and urgent attention. That's the first point. Secondly, the gaps in our strategic financial capacity have been remedied with the recruitment of a Section 151 and a Deputy Section 151, and additional capacity has in the last few days been secured with our partners in Epping. So there is a significant increase now of skills, and I've got to say I've been very, very impressed. We'll have more of a discussion about that tomorrow evening. The nature of the review, and phase one has been completed, is fundamental and far-reaching. The Section 151 and the monitoring officer are giving this their full and urgent attention. And finally, as you know, this is not an individual, separate, isolated piece of work. It fits in with other work, the outcomes of which are pending. I'll give you the example of that would be the work that CIPFA are doing, and we had a first cut of their findings on our asset strategy. And as you know, that's integrally bound up with the capital review. So I look forward in September to a full and far-reaching set of recommendations. And although I would prefer to have had that insight earlier than we have, I'd rather wait and have it done properly, as I believe will be the case when you see the report back in September, at the end of September. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, William. Oh, Mark, you had a remark to add. Do you want to stay for just a second?
To be honest, Pam has covered some of it, and including CIPFA and working with them, and we were reassured meeting the representative from CIPFA, long depth of knowledge across national and local councils. So we're pleased to have that extra input. And that means that, yes, the review, in my understanding, is still ongoing, especially with the new Section 151 officer and his deputy coming in as a fresh pair of eyes as well. And that's partly why I've ensured you are having a meeting with him, without me there, but we can have a follow-up meeting to that as well. But also you have had the invite, which you referred to, about the capital programme workshop, which includes a small selection of councillors in terms of those who are most focused on it, and we will go through everything at that workshop. And before the workshop happens, there'll be an information pack that goes out to enable pre-reading and questions to come from that. So we'll be prepared. Well, hopefully officers will be prepared with answers at the workshop, so we can work through everything. And we will come back to other issues on the agenda, with Northern Gateway coming up later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very full answer.
Right, Cabinet. Let's go to the paper. I thank those who've been visiting, because challenge and conversation are good and necessary. The paper, as we have it in front of us, goes back to the peer challenge of September 22, which, let's just choose to be positive for a moment. Acknowledge, and this is after a cross-party test and challenge, actually Colchester is a pretty special place. The people in it, the people in the organisation, the councillors, between us, we make for a very effective team. And that conclusion, which I shall remember, we're on the cusp of something great, it feels right, given all the opportunities, our success in funding and securing funding elsewhere, the energy and effort across the chamber. But we've got to deliver it, so that feels quite right to me. We had 8 recommendations from city status, and we talked about capital, a long-term vision, our priorities and what matters most. The election cycle picked up by Councillor Dundas, the ways of working, and actually really crucial from my perspective, how the family of organisations works together. Colchester Borough Homes, a commercial company, M4, and what we consider the council, CCC. Now that is complex work still in train, but in the round, what we've got here is a comprehensive and constructive, positive statement of where we're at. We've made significant progress. We've got much more to do yet. We see the LGA on the 27th of July, and I hope those in this room, that some of you can find the time to join those conversations, and they will focus on the areas where there is the greatest gap between the original intention and where we stand. I think that's the most constructive thing, but they'll take stock overall and we'll see what supplementary advice they want to give. Are there any other comments on this, or can we go to the recommendations as in paragraph 3? Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Oh dear, sorry, a lot of it. We go on to item 8.1, which is acquisition of 4 new build homes as part of the council's house building programme. I've got Councillor Dundas and Councillor Rippingale. Paul, did you want to speak now or later?
I do want to mention specific figures, so it might be better to do it in the confidential section, if that's okay.
In which case, Councillor Rippingale.
I feel like I'm going to need a little bit more space every time I come here. So thank you for having me this evening, and I appreciate Councillor Smith isn't here, so a written response will be welcome unless he's popped up. So despite the financial pressures on the council, as always, I welcome new housing into the CBH stock. The cost of living crisis is increasing homelessness, particularly for private renters who can't afford the rent rises that we are currently seeing, as well as homeowners who are facing the greatest interest rate increases in a generation. What I'm asking is how the portfolio holder will adapt to these changing circumstances, and what we will be doing to ease the looming housing crisis on these 2 groups. My second point is around temporary accommodation. Given the increasing pressure the temporary accommodation is putting onto our general fund, councillors have recently received several serious complaints regarding the standard and management of emergency temporary accommodation. Can the portfolio holder look to reassure us, as we as a council are paying for this accommodation, is regularly checked to ensure it's of a good standard? Alongside this is subject to the Statutory Code of Guidance in Chapter 17 in the 2017 Homelessness Reduction Act. In relation to suitability in particular, can he assure us that the temporary accommodation used by Colchester City Council meets the relevant standards within this code? This particularly relates to the Globe Hotel and the Riverside Hotel, where these complaints have been lodged with our councillors, and obviously I'll look forward to a written response from Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Kelly. Can I just acknowledge, thank you for coming. I want to acknowledge, as I understand this, you're having a close dialogue with the portfolio holder as his shadow. That's correct, isn't it? So I hope that this will be naturally followed up. But in terms of the record, I think we need to say just respond on the principle. Of course, we are committed to meeting all the statutory obligations, like any other local council. I'm not aware of these particular incidents, but I would expect there will be shortfall, and then I expect to see investigation and response. This is just how these things will be. We are aware of the crisis. This earlier conversation, without repeating it, I think illustrated it, both existing short-term pressures and then a wave that's coming towards us, as we will have Afghan evictions, and we will have a constant trickle of others like those who've come to this country from Ukraine, who have been relying upon the generous heart of local people for now many months. A burden, emotional and practical burden, which we know has already meant this, and you will know, has already meant some extra homelessness. So without saying too much more than we've said already, we're absolutely committed as an administration with the support of the Labour group to looking at this together and to working across the chamber to welcome ideas and views, be as radical as it's possible to be, to reflect the pressures on people that then in turn reflect and then result in homelessness. And we must do all we can together to mitigate that. But I'm sure Councillor Smith will pick up on the details as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to come back and reassure that we have been having close contact, and he's made me feel very welcome in including me in portfolio briefings. So thank you, and I'll look forward to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that as well. Please, Natalie.
I'd just also like to say from a community's point of view, sorry, that obviously my employment and financial support team are working with as many people as they can to prevent people getting to the homelessness stage, so we can obviously intervene before it gets that far, and hopefully therefore taking a lot more pressure off the homelessness situation there as well.
Thank you. I think it would be a helpful thing to ensure that whatever response that follows included the data. We see it periodically, don't we, of the many hundreds of people that are being helped by our teams. It gives a sense of scale of challenge, but also quality of response. If I could leave that with you. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Mark.
I just wanted to talk to the positives of this. We had a paper last cabinet where we were investing and getting a good deal. So a good deal for taxpayers, but a good deal for those people in need of housing. And these two papers then follow on top of that. So we're getting a good deal for our residents. We are doing the best we can in the situation we face. We have our own housing stock, which is, in my opinion, the better way of managing housing as a district council. And we have invested in temporary accommodation as well, going out and buying houses off the market in order to reduce the amount that go externally out of our properties. But it is a national crisis, and we need more support from government. We also need, for example, to look at a moratorium on right to buy or something similar, something a bit more radical that enables us to sort of row back on the deforestation of council housing that has happened over numerous governments. So anyway, I'll talk to the positive of this paper and just say from a financial point of view as well, the paper lower down about the disposal of units helped pay for this particular investment of 4 new build housing properties. So I think it's a really good trade. I think it's a really good deal for the people of Colchester, and I hope it will provide 4 homes for people in greatest need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other remarks on this paper, Martin?
I think this is a really positive step forwards. It's also worth noting that of the 150, of all the houses on this particular development, none of them are going to be for owner-occupiers. The whole development is going to be rental, which did surprise people, but that is the new business model that Countryside Properties do. They sell all their properties, they get the money up front, and then they sell them to pension companies or whoever it is who then rent them out. And that is what is happening there. So those houses that we are buying will be amongst rented properties. So it does seem to be that the market is changing. So I just thought it was worth a note. And it's in Mile End, which of course is a wonderful place to live.
Indeed it is. I understand it's a long-term lease holding arrangement for this site. In that sense, there's greater surety for those who do find themselves unable to buy but needing somewhere to rent. Thank you for raising that. That's not in the paper. Any other thoughts on this paper? Mark set the scene for the 3. So on this one, any other thoughts? If not, then I suggest we go to the decision, which is subject to Part B, to proceed with the purchase that's suggested here for the reasons that are described, given the challenges for us in terms of an absence of or a lack of social housing. Are we content to accept the recommendations set out in paragraph 2?
Agreed.
Thank you. Mark, the next one, would you like to talk to that?
I'm happy to take Councillor Smith's position and put in a bad joke to really bring it to life. But maybe that's it. I mean, we have already discussed the matter of housing. I've already explained that the first paper shows how we can get a good deal. This second paper does the same. We do have to consider more additional funding for these units, and that's a balance of priorities. And Councillor Sunnox did talk about borrowing before. These are elements where we have to. And I feel that actually for quality of life purposes for our residents, but also for the taxpayer, it does deliver a better deal rather than paying extortionate costs for temporary accommodation. We are acquiring more units for ourselves, and I think that gives us more security and gives the families that will move into these houses more security as well. So I'd commend this to you, Leader.
Thank you. Any other remarks on this paper? We'll go to the financials under Part B. Okay, thank you. And approved? Yep.
Agreed.
Thank you. In which case we go on to the third of these related papers, item 8.3, which is disposal of 105 106A Shrub End Road. Mark.
Thank you. So I have touched on this already, but just to explain further to members of the public of the council, this is a property that we have had ownership of. And again, it comes down to a balance of what do we dispose of, what do we sell. The word disposal always sounds quite strange to those outside of these rooms, but it is simply to sell on this property. We looked at the property to develop ourselves. We found it would not be suitable, it did not work in terms of viability, and perhaps a different developer on the market could take it forward. And we've had good valuations and good offers that we believe would absolutely get us a good deal again for the taxpayer. And as I explained, this will enable us to acquire the other 4 houses. So it's a good swap, I believe. And the financials are included in some of the confidential items, but I commend this to Cabinet as well.
Thank you. I think the only point for the public record is the details not here, just to bring out that this is about independent valuations of price, whether a property in this case is being sold and the sums of money realised then reinvested, or when we're purchasing properties as on the earlier 2 papers. So there is some robustness, as we would expect, to how this has gone. So we pay fair value, we get a secure discount in each of these purchases, and we contribute ourselves, and we secure Homes England support and funding. That template ensures that these purchases relative to rent are viable over a period of the life of the properties, in fact, well within the life of the properties. So this is financially robust and it increases our housing stock. Thank you very much indeed. Nothing else. Can I ask for agreement, please, to the third paper as well? Right. Item 9.1, Policy Panel Work Programme. I believe we have Councillor Law. Jocelyn, please come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here this evening. Yes, I'm here in my capacity as chair of the policy panel, and I wanted to come along and speak in support of the work programme that's before you. I think I share with my colleague, my vice chair, Councillor Scott Bittal, a feeling that the policy panel has a very important role in being able to connect the views and feedback from residents and pass that on to Cabinet to sort of help connect the Cabinet to residents, because I think sometimes it can be very hard for residents to sort of understand the mysterious ways in which councils work and how they can get involved and give their views. And I think that the work programme really echoes a lot of concerns and reflects the important aspects of our residents' lives this year. For example, there are items on it that reflect the very real infrastructure of people's lives, such as looking at an update from a landscape, nature and waterways report, looking at sports and leisure facilities, at community assets, also looking at the importance of the retail environment and the economic climate of a city centre, and also things like parking, things that really impact on all our residents' lives. But also, I think it also highlights aspects that reflect perhaps the way in which our residents live and their values. For example, I think it's very important that we want to look at issues such as equality, diversity and inclusion. And again, myself and Councillor Scott Bittell are very passionate that all people have barriers removed and are able to make a full contribution to society. We've also got aspects such as the importance of commemorations, and I know that that's something that was inspired by thoughts about commemorating those lost in a pandemic, but also marking the important contribution that people like Her Late Majesty the Queen have made, how we can have responses to commemorations. And I'm also very supportive of having elements such as the financial inclusion and cost of living item on the work programme. And it's already been referenced here this evening. We have ever-increasing interest rates, inflation, problems with energy bills, and this impacts all residents, also the businesses that they might work in or own, and that also affects people's employment in the city centre. And I think it's really incumbent on the council to be able to support our residents and the businesses. So in closing, I really want to also say that I welcome the presence of the Deputy Leader at our first meeting and his input that day. And, I think our policy panel is very strong. We've got councillors who've got a long term of experience on the council and also on the policy panel. And I know that all of us on policy panel look forward to working constructively and collaboratively with Cabinet in terms of serving our residents and supporting members on the council. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much indeed. That's eloquently put. Mark might want to respond in a moment. Can I just sort of say from my part, having attended meetings last year, there was a quality of conversation and engagement which was good for those in the panel and helpful to other members and to Cabinet. And I think it's that spirit that's going to really matter. My only reservations are that there's a very long list, and talking to your deputy, she offered before I could just say just that, it's a very long list. And I think there is something about considering which of these you might address first, because there is some depth to some of these subjects that may take you and therefore officers some time to work through, and some of them would also require independent evidence, in my view. The obvious one would be the Business Improvement District, who have a new and I have to say very polished retail strategy. They'd like to walk you through all of that. So that's my only personal reservation, and perhaps I'll make a suggestion back to you before we close, but I'll go to Mark first and then see what else colleagues would like to say.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Jocelyn. I found it a very sort of vibrant and interesting meeting, and I gave my input where possible to direct some of the agenda, and I think you've come up with a really good selection of items to get your teeth into to support the forward movement of this city and this council and the borough. So I do support them. I'm quite interested to hear David's points just there, which are absolutely right, about how do we prioritise them, because sometimes you try and do too much. I think we're all aware of that as councillors, and can we focus on some of them with greater priority. But I enjoyed the discussion, and I'm glad we got this list, and would welcome any suggestion from you, Leader, about how to prioritise and scale it to the right balance.
Thank you. Any other views on the remarks before we go to next steps? Jocelyn, is there anything you want to say now?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to say, Leader, that also in sort of initial discussions with council officers ahead of the initial meeting, I think it was suggested that sometimes during the year issues can crop up with certain items, and actually during the year it might be natural that some items fall back and perhaps don't get taken forward, and that certainly happened last year, I think, in terms of the landscape and nature and waterways policy. So perhaps, although you might feel it's a lengthy list, that list could sort of stand as it is. It means that we have sort of, backup items if needed, and I'm sure that some items will be more of an update, whereas others will be, returning items. Thank you.
No, thank you. None of us, any other comments from colleagues? None of us want to cramp. The whole approach has been about opening up that dialogue and exchange. So there's nothing that's going to change in that. This is just practicality. So my view, subject to others, is items A and B absolutely wine hot. In terms of the forward list, I think the things that strike me as perhaps thinking of our audience, particularly helpful would be the sports, leisure facilities and provision, because that's a continuing conversation and lying ahead of us. And it came into a senior team and cabinet conversation briefly last night away from here, was the reality that Leisure World is hugely carbon inefficient. Those I've talked to, and it's no more than headline discussions on a busy train and people responsible for delivering them elsewhere. And at the LGA that Councillor Young and I attended last week, Councillor Dundas, yes, amongst the canapes. Swimming pools in a modern leisure world, in the modern way, are very different. They require a hugely different approach to how we invest. But done well, they could secure their future. But the cost, 40 million. I suspect these things will be a starter. So conversations around some of those forward-looking items where we're looking at need. We've had a conversation over a year ago about youth zones with a lot of traction. We've missed a real opportunity there in the sense of capital that was available from Whitehall is no longer available. So some of these things are fashionable or not and supported or not, but there is a real depth of conversation on that one subject alone, how it links to youth service, what we can play as a role alongside county. So I stay on that for 2 minutes just to sort of say that one thing alone has got real depth and worth and is worth your time and attention in my view. So I'm happy to sort of take views from colleagues. I would put that at the top of my list. I think community assets and community development, there's 2 items on this list. The policy piece about on the rights to bid, and it's a great list, I have to say. And then the mapping and examination, those fit into what we're trying to do as a council. So we're looking at our assets. We're looking at doing things differently. That's where the policy panel could make a real contribution, in my view. I'm looking at the chief exec to see if she's looking concerned. Right. The chief exec got something in her eyes with nothing to do with this conversation. No. So I would offer those 3, but you can keep the list, but if you would, I'd like to suggest that we move some of those items towards the top of it in terms of your starting points, and then you do exactly what you have said, which is accept that some will fall out. Some will be most appropriately dealt with as business changes through governance and audit, for example, or even scrutiny. So there's always that, let's not do things 3 times. They have to go through leadership and cabinet anyway. So that's a response to you. Does that give us your feedback?
Yeah, I think I can, concur with it. That's very helpful. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think that Policy Panel is a very enjoyable forum, because we're able to have this feedback and interaction through the year, which I think, makes it very fruitful for members and, cabinet alike. Thank you.
Very much. And Councillor Coy just said to me, of course, we can have a follow-up conversation through Chair's briefing elsewhere. But if we take that as a starting point, okay, on the list, thank you. Absolutely up for the attitude and engagement. Take those items first, but have a flexibility about what we'll work through, depending on the committee's view, availability of officers, where it fits with the wider piece. But there's some substantial items here where you can have a real, I think, make a real contribution to our forward planning, and that'd be great. Cabinet, could we so agree? Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Corey. Right. Progress of responses to the public is 9.2, and Councillor Dundas, please. Paul, I think you know what to do.
Probably work it out. Thank you for reminding us about the youth zone. I've forgotten all about that. We must have to ask what happened to that and manifesto commitments. But I digress.
In your time, I
yes. In relation to this, actually, I think this is relevant on this item. I just want to talk about actually what happened at the Environment and Sustainability panel back on June the 22nd, because we had a fairly extensive public attendance. And one of the things which came out of the Have Your Says is that, and I think probably the reason why some people attending and speakers seemed quite vexed, is it seemed that at previous meetings they'd been promised various written responses and hadn't received any. They were again promised replies or by officers and the chair to questions to be, I think, provided within 7 days in some cases. I don't know whether those happened or not. But really, my point is that I think this is something we need to keep a very close eye on, because clearly, particularly when there are contentious issues, and clearly when residents feel they are perhaps not necessarily justly, but feel they aren't being listened to, it causes a lot of problems where there don't need to be any. So I know that this item covers off looking at responses to Cabinet and Council questions. My question is, where are we catching, or where is our catch-all to check that we're responding to all panels and committees? And should maybe this item in future, to ensure it all ends up in one place, actually include all panels and not just those two? Thank you.
I think we're all nodding in agreement. You're absolutely right, obviously on the principle, make a promise, keep it. And if you can't, then you tell those that you made a promise to that when you will be able to reply. It's first order good administration, isn't it? We'll take that away, but let's make this a place that does just what you've suggested. Thank you, that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Anything else on that item, by the way, which has have dates completed for individual items? Michelle, please.
Thank you. At the last Cabinet meeting, a member of the public had their say regarding the condition of the netball courts at Highwoods, wanting some feedback around the need to and date of retarmacking the courts. She was also asking about the lighting, which hadn't been working properly. So I have subsequently emailed her back, but just to update you, I have spoken to the Head of Leisure Services, Adam Britton, and have discovered that the work on the tarmacking of the courts is aimed for the 7th of August, completion by the end of September. With regarding the lighting, a data collection was put into place for a period of 3 weeks, and the data back shows that there was a voltage surge, which was the reason for the lighting not working properly. And also, just to clarify with Linda in my email about the netball courts being the school's asset, so it's not directly the council's responsibility financially. However, because the council recognised the very, very importance of these netball courts and how they serve a vast array of members of public throughout the year, we have invested £86,000 of Section 106 money to support the running of those courts, like the tarmac and the lighting. But I have replied extensively to Linda, just to let you know.
Thank you, that's very helpful and absolutely in the spirit of the discussion we just had. So that, unless there's any other view, I think rounds out the current list of Cabinet questions. Thank you very much, Michelle, that's great. Okay, this is when we go to one of the prime duties of the Deputy Leader.
Thank you. So I move the motion to exclude the public and members of the press. I move that in accordance with Section 100A(4) of the Local Government Act 1972 and in accordance with the Local Authorities Executive Arrangements, Meeting and Access to Information, England, Regulations 2012, the public, including members of the press, be excluded from the meeting for the following items as they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3
of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972.
Do we so agree? Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? We have to agree it. Thank you. Okay, stop it live.